Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Hello and welcome back to Badass of the Week. I'm Ben Thompson. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish, and we are going to do...
Hello, badasses.
Yeah, we are going to do another one of these little bonus episodes. And this week, we're going to talk about something that I realized that I've referenced a few times during the show, but never actually defined, which is the Damnatio Memoria. I mentioned it when we talk about Nero. I think I mentioned it in Julia Agrippina. I talk about it with Benedict Arnold. And then I throw that term out there without actually defining it or just assuming people understand it.
Yeah, so it's Damnatio Memoriae, which is Latin for condemnation of memory.
Ooh. So damn is as a word comes from condemn.
Yeah, it's the word. There's a noun damnum, which means damage. So you get some nouns, some other words coming from that. Yeah.
Damage.
So it's like damaging
so condemn
of memory,
is like damage their memory.
Yeah.
And damn you is damage you.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and maybe damage in a very official capacity.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I didn't know that. That's new information for me. So, Pat, you could probably talk a little bit about the Damnatio Memoria in Rome. So that's a thing that you kind of want to define this for us before we get going on. Because I want to talk about people who have had this happen to them, but we should define it.
Yeah. So Damnatio Memoriae, it's a term devised by modern scholars, actually, to describe a phenomenon, to put a label on a phenomenon that happens not infrequently. You know, if any of our listeners have ever gone through a bad breakup, let's say it was a bad breakup, because, okay, there are healthy breakups, but we're not talking about that. Bad breakup. You might want to just hide or delete photos of your ex just because, you don't want to dwell on it. You want to move on. You don't want weird vibes.
Purge your Facebook of the old profile pictures of the two of you together. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, I don't know, maybe depending on what your breakup process / coping mechanisms are, maybe you want to take a photograph and actually slash it up or physically with scissors cut your ex's face out of the photo. So there's the picture of the two of you in Paris, and then all of a sudden, bam, there's a picture of you next to a big hole in Paris. And one route is forgetting, and one route is really leaning into and emphasizing the process of, no, we are getting rid of this person.
Yes, the triumphantly deleting their phone number from your phone, right? Delete contacts. Yeah. Are you sure? Yes, I am sure.
Yes, yeah. And so historians have realized that, okay, this is a thing that humans do. And they concocted the Latin term Damnatio Memoriae. So the phrase...
So that wasn't used in Rome. The Romans wouldn't know what a Damnatio Memoria was if you mentioned it to them.
Well, I think the term, as a technical term, we don't have it in the sources, but obviously it's Latin. They would have figured it out. They would be like, oh, you mean what we did to Domitian? Yeah.
We just call that Domitianing.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the Damnatio Memoria is if somebody is, there is the people who are just kind of hatefully remembered of never forget, Quisling or Judas Iscariot or these, we just hate them and we should all hate them. But there's other ones where it's I think about the line from George Orwell's 1984, when he says, he does not exist. He never existed. The kind of we don't talk about Bruno or the Lord Voldemort, he who shall not be named. They don't exist, and we do not talk about them, and we will never talk about them. We are going to erase them from history.
Yeah, you retcon history.
Yeah, you literally just erase them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really an interesting phenomenon, and it's cool, and because so much effort has been made to erase various people from history. I'm always curious about those people and who they are and what they did to deserve that. It's that kind of forbidden knowledge thing that I'm really interested in.
Yes, forbidden knowledge,
yes. And Benedict Arnold actually gets both of these treatments, right? Because Benedict Arnold, everybody's like, oh, you're a Benedict Arnold. That means you're a traitor. But they also, I think we talked about in his episode, there's a statue or a space for a monument to him at at West Point and at the battlefield at Saratoga, and they don't mention his name. There's just a space where there should be a statue of him, because at West Point they have plaques for all of the general officers that fought in the American Revolution, and there's a spot for him, and it says Major General, and it has his birth date, but it doesn't say his name. And then at Saratoga they have the commanding officers as statues, and there's a gap where Arnold's supposed to be, and so
so it's actually inviting curiosity.
Yeah, like what's the deal with this? And so I thought it'd be fun to go through some people who have had this happen to them in the past, and we could kind of talk a little bit about various people who have been erased from history for various things. And sometimes sometimes they were bad people, and sometimes they weren't bad people, and they were succeeded by bad people who wanted to write them out of history. It's that history is written by the winners kind of thing, where, if you didn't like the emperor before you, maybe we'll just chisel his name off the statue,
Yeah.
So the first real records we have of this are happening in ancient Egypt, which, and the difference between a Damnatio Memoria is this is like codified by the law, or like at least like by people in charge have like made a significant effort to erase this person from history.
Yeah, it's not some random person committing vandalism in some isolated instance. It's actually a centralized effort to scratch their name out.
Yeah. And we see this happen with the Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut is really interesting. She was a woman who became pharaoh. She had taken over as the regent for her stepson, who was this boy named, he would become the pharaoh Thutmose III. But Hatshepsut was his stepmom, and she took over as regent because her husband died when Thutmose was too young to take over.
Yeah, he was like a toddler at the time, right?
Right. He was only a couple years old, and she took over and declared herself pharaoh, which was extremely rare for ancient Egypt. And then she was able to seize power. She led military campaigns. She went down to the land of Punt and came back with palm trees and stuff that she had taken from that region, and gold. And she, from what we can tell, had a very successful reign. Her son, Thutmose III, he ends up... Stepson, yes, her stepson.
I just mentioned that because maybe, who knows, maybe that's the source of some of the tension. Anyway,
stepson,
go on.
Nephew/stepson, I think.
Yeah. Anyway. Thutmose III.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Thutmose III takes over, and he gets the reputation, they call him the Napoleon of Egypt, because he had done a lot of work to expand the realm of Egypt. Although it's a little difficult to know how much it was him and how much was Hatshepsut, because when he took over after her death, he tried to completely erase her from history. He scratched out her cartouches. He removed her images. She had statues carved of herself as a pharaoh with the beard and everything and the headdress and all that. And he basically had it recarved to look like him.
So this is ancient Egyptian Photoshop?
Yes. Yeah. Like carved out her cartouches, put his own name over top of them, re-chiseled her face to look like him. And so a lot of the stuff about Hatshepsut we didn't even know until later on. Once archaeologists started to get down and dig into some of the older things, we only have a couple of statues of her that still survive. But then now there's this mystery of like, okay, how much of this was Thutmose III and how much of this was Hatshepsut, and he just took credit for it because he didn't like her. We see it again with a different pharaoh named Akhenaten. And
that guy.
Yeah, Akhenaten's a really interesting one.
So Akhenaten, if you look at Egyptian art, there's this same style of art that just persists across the centuries. Like, you have to actually be able to read the hieroglyphs in some ways to know what century a particular piece of Egyptian art is from, because the style is so consistent. And everyone who appears in Egyptian art, they're this very stylized way of representing human beings. But Akhenaten, he's not represented in this stylized way. He's actually looking like a normal kind of, dad bod human being. Like, he's not this standard proportioned human being. He's kind of got maybe not a pot belly, but he's showing signs of gravity. There's a real noticeable shift in the art. If you know anything about Egyptian religion, hey, ancient Egyptian religion is polytheistic. You have all these gods, they have names, they have stories, they have backstories. But Akhenaten was kind of a rebel, a revolutionary, a visionary, depending on whom you ask. And he said, hey, you know what? Let's just worship one God, the sun.
Yeah.
As in the sun that shines in the sky. Some people took umbrage at that.
Yeah. I mean, so I was in Egypt 3 years ago. And when you go through the different museums they have there, Akhenaten and his wife are extremely recognizable because the art style is so different. And, I'd encourage listeners to go look at this because, when you picture, we were just talking about Thutmose III and take a Ramses II. These guys are 1,000 years apart, but their images look very similar. When I say there's a big giant colossal statue of an Egyptian pharaoh, you can picture what that looks like. But if you look up Akhenaten, Akhenaten is completely different. He's depicted completely differently. The art style is really different for his face, his body. If you were in a museum there, you can pick him out no matter where you are.
Yeah, you don't need to read hieroglyphics to read his name. You're just like, oh yeah, that guy. His face, he looks more gaunt.
Yeah, really, really interesting, and definitely worth looking him up. But yeah, the Egyptians did have Amun-Ra, who was the sun, but he was like, no, it's just the sun now. It's just the sun god, and we're going to get rid of Osiris and Anubis and Horus and all of this stuff. And that did not go over well. People did not like that. The laws were changed back by King Tutankhamun, King Tut, who was either Akhenaten's son or grandson, some way related to him through blood. Mm-hmm. He takes over as pharaoh after Akhenaten and changes everything back because everybody was so mad about it. And then Akhenaten gets people are so upset that he messed with their religion that they try to write him out of everything.
Oof.
Mm-hmm. And then, Ramses II comes later, and Ramses II was also famous. He did not do it for the same reasons that Tutankhamun and Thutmose III did it. He was very famous for carving over people's faces and carving out cartouches and writing his own name over the top. But that was just because he was personally kind of a megalomaniac and was like, actually, I built this thing. Do you guys like this? I did it. All pharaoh art is now mine.
Yes. Yeah.
So continuing on talking about some of the ancient world, there's also, I always find the story of Asherah interesting. There is a, we're talking about religion, and this is more of a conspiracy theory than anything else, I think, because I don't think we have a ton of data on this, but there is a school of thought that Yahweh among the ancient Hebrews had a wife named Asherah, who may have been one of these gods of Baal kind of thing, may have been a holdover from a polytheistic religion in that region before. But, I like that, she's gone and she doesn't appear in the Bible or anything else. But there was some talk that in the early days, there may have been a wife of Yahweh named Asherah, which is cool.
Yeah, so he didn't start off as a monotheistic god. He started off as a polytheistic god who went through a bad breakup.
Right, yes. And then they cut those pictures of them in Paris out. And according to this theory, which I don't know. Yeah. We cannot confirm because nothing survives because they got Damnatio Memoria. And that's the exciting and cool and weird thing about the Damnatio Memoria is that we don't know. The Greeks did it as well, and it was less codified. One of the big stories from ancient Greece is the story of Herostratus. So you have the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which people are generally familiar with the existence of them. The pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza is the only wonder of the ancient world that still stands today. They have a new 7 wonders of the world, and it includes the Colosseum and the Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro. And there's a new set, but the original 7 wonders as written, only the Great Pyramid of Giza survives. And one of these 7 wonders was the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. And
modern day Turkey.
Right. And it was apparently this really amazing temple to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. And it was beautiful. And this guy, Herostratus, was this Greek vandal, like punk kid who wanted people to remember his name. So he burned the temple to the ground. He was just some kind of like anarchist, like attention hungry dude. And he burns the temple to the ground because he wants to be famous.
Can't he just do something like constructive, like start a band or something?
You know, I always feel like that's better to just create something cool, build a temple of Artemis rather than burn it to the ground. But hey,
yeah, but if you're gonna burn down the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which is like the famous temple of Artemis, okay, yeah, your name's gonna get in the papers.
But not in a hatefully remembered way, or you know. And with the Greeks, they were so angry about this, like that when they arrested him as part of his punishment, the official punishment was that nobody should ever mention his name again, that he would be erased from history, and that because he had done this to be famous, he should be not famous. So nobody should talk about him ever.
Ooh, so the punishment really does fit the crime.
Yeah.
In particular, the motivation for the crime.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't work because we're talking about him now, but, but that was the idea.
But yeah.
They also did that to Ephialtes of Trachis, who's the guy that showed the Persians the secret paths around Thermopylae where they could kill King Leonidas. The deal with that guy was that people were not supposed to talk about him. Also, the Spartans put out like a bounty on his head, and somebody did eventually kill that guy and get paid for it. But you weren't supposed to talk about him either. But, you know, like you said, so these are all kind of cool examples from, I don't know if cool is the right word, but they're all examples from ancient history of people being written out of history. But by far the majority of these stories come from ancient Rome, Imperial Rome and Republic Rome. And that's what you were talking about, why this has a Latin term. And so we're going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the Romans that got this treatment. All right, welcome back. We are talking about the Damnatio Memoria, and Pat, we are going to talk about some stories from the Roman Empire of people who had this happen to them. So I guess the first time we see this done in an official capacity in Rome is with Lucius Sejanus, and he's kind of an interesting character.
Yeah. He was a friend of the Emperor Tiberius. If you watched the BBC miniseries I, Claudius, he's the character played by Patrick Stewart with curly hair. I don't know if it's Patrick Stewart's own hair or a wig. I don't know. But yeah, he was an operator. I mean, you kind of had to be if you were that highly placed in the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And yeah, he became the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. He actually helped evolve the Praetorian Guard into not just, some random guys being bodyguards, but actually a really influential political force. And if you know the history of Roman emperors, you know that more than once, it's the Praetorian Guard that...
Time for a new emperor.
Yeah. And so, and he was... suspected of conspiracy against Tiberius, and Tiberius was kind of paranoid. That was his reputation. But who knows? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. I don't know.
Yeah, Tiberius retired to Capri and was having his wild parties out there, and Sejanus stayed in Rome and was trying to run things in Tiberius's name, and maybe he kind of overstepped his boundaries a little bit.
Yes, at least by Tiberius's standards. And did they hug it out? No, they did not. He was arrested and executed, and also a bunch of other people he had going along with him. And so that's Sejanus. Yeah. And Tiberius does not like him. Yeah,
and he gets written out of history. He gets officially written out of history. He's deleted. All of his stuff is like all his name's taken off of things. His name is carved, like literally, like if it was carved into a piece of rock, somebody went by with a chisel and chiseled it out.
Yeah. So it's going to be pretty obvious. Anyone walking by is going to be like, oh, whose name was chiseled out?
Yeah, he who shall not be named.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happened to Caligula and Nero both briefly. They got them removed. It happened to Messalina, the wife of Claudius.
Before Julia Agrippina.
Yeah, thanks to Julia Agrippina, who we've talked about.
Yeah.
Messalina got Damnatio Memoriae. It's the only Roman woman I have on this list that we're looking at here, which is kind of unique and interesting. But that was just how badass Julia Agrippina was, that she could make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to Vespasian's son, Domitian, as you mentioned.
Yeah, one of his two sons, not Titus, his older son.
No, they liked him.
People liked. The Senate liked him. Yeah. But Domitian, the younger son, yeah. So Domitian was the younger son. Titus. Okay, so Vespasian, whom we talked about in an earlier episode, he had two sons, Titus and Domitian, and they were about 10 years apart in age. Titus was older, and it was so clear from the get-go that Titus was Vespasian's designated successor. And Vespasian was grooming him to take over, giving him opportunities, And Domitian was like, he was there, he was hanging out. For whatever reason, after Titus was emperor and died really early on into his reign, I think by natural causes, even though, you're free to speculate, but Titus died. And then Domitian became the new emperor. And Domitian came in maybe with a chip on his shoulder or something. He did not get along with the senatorial class. And if you're an emperor, you really do want to get along with the Senate, They didn't like each other. So, yeah, Domitian had what some people describe as a reign of terror. A lot of members of the senatorial class were just really, nervous and living in fear that they would get busted for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Or if Domitian just decided he didn't like them, he found ways of disappearing them. And, I shouldn't say disappearing because we actually know what happened. He found ways of
eliminating them.
Yes. So when Domitian died, he got damnatioed.
Yeah, and that happens. That's kind of a common theme. So it's really interesting because when you talk about Roman emperors, especially later on, like another damnatio happened to Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus. Commodus will be a familiar name because it's also the name of the emperor in Ridley Scott's Gladiator movie. But that Commodus...
The one who dressed up like Hercules and pretended to be a gladiator.
Right, which is what Commodus did in real life. He dressed up like Hercules and pretended to be a gladiator. And that was like... That's not cool. He's not that. Maybe some of the normal people of Rome, like the regular humans, thought that was cool, but the Senate did not think that was very imperial of him.
It was undignified.
Yes.
And actually, I don't know off the top of my head for this period, but for many periods in Roman history, being a gladiator actually was legally considered undignified. Like you actually lost a lot of your privileges
when
as
you were
a
slave,
citizen.
right? Weren't you? A lot of gladiators were enslaved.
Yeah.
So, but what we see and so Commodus gets damnatioed as well, but he also pissed off the senatorial class. And, we have talked about this in the past. It's like if you were a Roman emperor and you died, depending on how well the Senate liked you, they either declared you a god or Damnatio Memoriae you. Generally speaking, there are some exceptions. Generally, if you didn't rule long enough for them to make a decision about you, you just kind of were dead. But if you reigned for at least 5 years, one of those two things was going to happen. You either pissed everybody off or you made everybody like you. One of the more out there Roman emperors has this happen to him, Elagabalus.
Oh, yeah.
Elagabalus is a character. He's a weird one.
Yeah, he's weird. He's not typical for Roman emperors. And I wonder if Elagabalus was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some historians interpret Elagabalus as a trans woman. Elagabalus liked to be called domina, ma'am, rather than dominus, sir.
I heard that he had like a sex cult, ran like a sex cult. I mean, but also it's as with all things involving ancient Rome and history, a lot of the stuff about him was written by people who hated him after he was dead.
Yeah. And So maybe it was a sex cult, in which case, whatever. It's a bit, if it's between consenting adults, whatever. But
that's fair. That's
people
really
are going to spin it. People are going to spin it. If you don't like someone, you're going to be opportunistic. You're going to spin it however you want. And who knows? Maybe there was icky stuff going on. I don't know. Elagabalus, according to some sources, dressed up and acted as a female sex worker, and had affairs with women, not necessarily because Elagabalus was attracted to women, but maybe because Elagabalus wanted to kind of learn techniques from them. Now, Elagabalus is actually named after a Syrian god, not a Roman god. There's a Syrian god named Elagabal. And so we've got this Roman emperor who's named after a god who is not part of the Roman state religion, like, Jupiter or Juno or Minerva, And I think that made people nervous. Like, wait, are you going to replace Jupiter with some other head god? Like, what? And according to some sources, even married a Vestal Virgin. I have lots of question marks here. Okay, yeah. So be that as it may, Elagabalus is doing things that don't necessarily fit neatly into the boxes that the Roman government, the Roman Senate is expecting. And how do you deal with this? Well...
Yeah. So, and they were pretty young too, from my understanding of it. They were pretty young when they took over. And so who knows, right? Like... Thanks to probably pissing off the senatorial class, like after Elagabalus died, they got a Damnatio Memoria, and that stuff's erased, and some of the stuff that we have about them is written later, and who knows? But Elagabalus is an interesting case.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Later Roman Empire, but still definitely interesting. And, we have cases of the Damnatio happening, not just the Romans had it kind of down to a science. And this is just a short list of the more interesting Romans who had this happen to them. There's a bunch, a lot, especially towards the later empire. Everybody who fought against Constantine the Great got damnatioed by Constantine after he won, that kind of thing. So like it happens a lot, and usurpers, they get damnatioed, and a usurper is anybody who doesn't win the war for succession. Mm-hmm. There's a long list of Roman emperors or wannabe emperors who had this happen to them. But I kind of want to move on to some different examples later on. There is a guy in the Republic of Venice in the medieval ages. His name is Marino Faliero, and he led a failed coup. He wanted to be the Doge of Venice, and he tried to set up a more centralized government with him having a little bit more power and kind of basically overthrow the Republic. And
you said failed coup. So
yes, he was defeated.
He's not the winner.
And they call him the Black Doge. And so he was defeated. And in Venice, they have portraits of all of the Doges, and his is covered with a black shroud. So they didn't erase his portrait, but they cover it with a black shroud so you can't see it, which is cool.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious when you're looking at it that there's something going on here.
Yeah. We don't talk about this guy, and like we don't talk about him, but like we want you to know that we don't talk about him.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
In India, they do it with a guy named Mir Jafar. He's the guy who kind of helped the British move in and conquer India. He was a local Raja, and he's a part of the British conquest of India is attributed in part to the treason of Mir Jafar. So he's like a Benedict Arnold case where sometimes they don't talk about him, and sometimes like you stub your toe walking around and you're like, damn you, Mir Jafar, this is your fault.
He became a swear word.
Yes.
Okay.
We see it in communist countries, in the 20th century, right? So this still happens. One thing you'll see is Nikolai Yezhov was the head of the NKVD for Stalin, and he was the one who was kind of in charge of doing a lot of the Stalinist purges. We talk about the purges when we talk about Simohea and the Winter War, but Stalin was partly paranoid and partly angry and partly had a lot of things happening. And in the 30s, he ended up executing a lot of members of politics and the military and the general population that he believed to be enemies of him. And Nikolai Yezhov was the NKVD officer. The NKVD is like the proto KGB or FSB. This guy was doing all the shootings for him. And then when Stalin decided he was done with the purges, he purged Yezhov and was like, actually, this guy was being overzealous with the purges. We didn't need to purge all these guys, so I'm going to purge him. And he gets erased from photographs. So that's
like literally.
Kind of a good example of that starting to happen. Of in the old days, you had to carve out something on a statue, but in the 1940s, which it was still like not easy to do, but they had to kind of doctor photographs to remove this guy from them.
Yeah. It's kind of a famous photo, right? You'll see both versions of it. You'll see the version, there are 4 guys standing by a canal or a waterfront or something. And then you'll see the other version and it's 3 guys. And where the 4th guy was, it's just gentle ripples on the water.
If you look closely, if you know to look for it, you can see it, because it is literally somebody had to physically cut out a picture of something of the water and tape it over top and then make a copy of that. They had to do some weird stuff to like make that happen. And if you know to look for it, you can kind of see the lines where Yezhov used to be. But he's out. And hey, look, Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, Nikolai who? Comrade Nikolai, never heard of the guy. I had when I went to China in 2004 for a school thing, and I was there for a month, and I wanted to get my hands on one of those little red books, the sayings of Chairman Mao. They sell them all over the place there, but they sell these like plastic cover ones that are for tourists, right? Like they have a vibe of like, here's a thing that we give to tourists because when you guys come here, you want this thing. And you go to the Great Wall, there's some guy sitting out front and he's got a big stack of these and he's handing them out. So I didn't want one of those. I wanted one that felt more authentic, right? Or more real. And so was trying to keep an eye out for it. And I found one, it was by some small bridge in Suzhou. And there was some older guy, and he had this little table that was like things from his house, basically. And it had one of these books and old and very clearly like from the Cultural Revolution. And I bought it. And I showed it to my teacher, and she kind of looked like she was seeing a ghost when she saw it. She was like, "This is real." She's like, "This is the real thing." And she starts flipping through it, and the Cultural Revolution in China was kind of a crackdown on people who didn't agree with Mao and the Communist Revolution there. And so you had to have this little red book on you at all times, and you had to have it marked up in a certain way, or you weren't like a good Red Guard. So certain passages had to be underlined, certain annotations had to be made. And one of the edits was there was a picture, like on the inside cover, or one of the first pages is a picture of, it starts with Engels, Marx, and then it goes down Lenin, and then it goes down to Mao. And then on the second page, apparently was at some point, the Chinese version of that was like all of the people who were in charge, like all the people who were running the show at the time when the book was printed. And this page is cut out, like very clearly like cut out with scissors of the book. And my teacher was telling me that it's because one of the people in that picture was determined to be a counter-revolutionary and against Mao and got purged by Mao. So you can't have his picture in the book. You're not a good, and the Cultural Revolution was pretty hardcore. Like people would grab your book and flip through it. And if you hadn't gotten the memo to cut that picture out, like you were going to get reported or something bad was going to happen and you were in trouble. So this guy had cut the picture out of the book. I mean, I don't know the name of the guy that got purged out of that, but that's interesting, right?
That's a risk with Damnatio Memoria. Your name might not get remembered.
I tried to look it up for this episode, and I wasn't confident, so I didn't mention it. Like really interesting stuff, right? How I don't know. If we're going to talk about Stalin again, Stalin has one of the quotes that I really think is is very powerful when we talk about history. And he says, education is a weapon, and the effects depend on who's wielding it and where they're aiming it. And I always think that's such a good way to talk about history.
Yeah.
This stuff is a weapon, and you can weaponize memory, right? You can weaponize history. And that's a damnatio memoria. We forget that these people existed because they're out and they're canceled and they're not coming back. So that's the damnatio memoria. And we thought that was interesting. And just one of the little things we wanted to talk about that I keep referencing without defining, and Pat has mentioned in the past that she likes to define terms.
Sometimes.
All right. Well, we hope you like that. And if you have other ideas for little things like this you'd like us to talk about, just you can send us an email or post a comment somewhere, and maybe we'll try to talk about that stuff too. Please do like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us out. If you leave us a comment or rate us, if you're going to give us a good rating, if you're going to give us a bad rating, you don't have to rate us. It's okay. We don't mind. And thank you guys so much for listening.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.